Welcome everyone to Blender Art Critique number 11. So this is the 11th Blender Art Critique video on my channel. So over the past month, people have been submitting their artworks to be critiqued. And if you'd like your artwork to be in the next critique video, then you can submit it through the Google form. The link is in the description. So you can submit your artwork anytime throughout the month, but the best time to submit your artwork is like the last couple of days of the month, because at the first of the month, the first day of every month, I go through all the submissions and I figure out which ones I want to critique, and then I create the critique video and upload it as soon as I can. So thank you everyone for sending in your artwork. Up on the screen you can see here are the artworks that I'm going to be critiquing in this video. Now I do apologize if your artwork didn't make it in the video. I'm not able to critique all the artworks, but thank you everyone for submitting your artwork. So this first artwork comes from a CashB. And you said that you are an intermediate Blender user and you're just getting into making realistic interiors. And you rendered this with Cycles Open Image Denoiser, and you wanted to know how you could improve it. Alright, so very cool scene here. I really like the lighting and overall feel, and the models are also really good, and I also really like the texturing. Overall, this is quite good. There are definitely some critiques that I have, but this is really nice. And I also really like that you added in the plants, because adding in some nature into interior scenes like this just really helps. So these plants here and also up there, that's really great. Alright, so my biggest critique when I looked at this scene is that I think the sizes are messed up. And I think some of these models are actually scaled up a little bit too big, so maybe scaling them down a bit would help. And also I think the ceiling is a little bit too low. It just seems a little bit too low. If this were a average person size, maybe they'd be about this big, you know, so they can sit on the couch. Or maybe the couch is a little bit bigger. I'm not quite sure how big it would be compared to like the legs, if they would touch the ground or not. But if someone were this big, then probably if they were standing, they would easily hit the fan, because even if someone was a little bit smaller than this, if they were standing up here, they'd probably hit the fan with their head. And I think this dresser here is a little bit too high as well, because you can see the height from the bottom of the dresser up here is almost halfway between the ending of it to the ceiling. And you can also see, like with this vase here, this vase is a pretty tall vase, but it's almost reaching the top of the ceiling. So if someone were standing right here, the top of the vase would be like how tall they are. And also the fan here, the fan just seems way too low. It seems like you'd bump your head. So I think everything probably needs to be scaled down a little bit, especially this couch. I think it's just a bit too big. And then also I do think that the roof is too low, so moving that up would help. And also it might help if this window was a little bit higher up as well, because, you know, if someone were standing, maybe their knees would come up to here, and that's pretty low. That seems pretty low. I think windows are usually a bit higher. I don't think they quite come up to someone's knees. They would be a little bit higher. So moving the window up would be really helpful, making the object smaller and then making the roof higher, and also moving the fan up. I think all those things would really help to make the size be more realistic. And then also here I noticed that the fan looks like it's floating. I can kind of see like a shadow. There's like a shadow right there. So just move the fan up and stick it into the roof. And then also I think the wall texture is a little bit too large. So I think you just need to scale everything so that there's more detail. So like on the UV mapping, scale it all up, because if I just kind of look at these, see how big these lumps are, these bumps here on like the texture of the wall, I think they are just a little bit too big. So just making it a bit smaller, making more detail so you can see more of the texture, I think that would help as well. And then the last thing that I would do is add more samples, because you can see right in here, especially in the darker areas, it looks pretty smudgy, and I think that's because you did add the denoiser, and that's great, but because there wasn't quite enough sampling, it just gets a bit smudgy and it doesn't look quite that nice. So turning up the samples and then re-rendering that would really help. But this is quite a good scene. I really like the lighting and the models and the materials and textures. Those are all really great, and I do like the scene that you can kind of see out here. It looks like maybe some mountains and stuff. And I do like the models that you chose. I think the models work pretty well, but they do just seem a little bit big, so making them smaller would help. So that's the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next artwork comes from BlenderStuffs. So BlenderStuffs sent in this Blender file, and what I did is I just rendered it out, and then I just put it into Krita so that I can draw over it. So this is really quite a good scene. It's quite realistic and I really like that. I really like the models that you chose, and I also really like the lighting and just like the clean and simple look of it. So you sent your Blender file and then I just rendered it out. And I noticed that you didn't use an HDRI. And if you're going for realism, then I think adding an HDRI would really help. So if you want to get a free HDRI from HDRI Haven, I think it's now polyhaven.com, and find an HDRI, you can try some different HDRIs. I think that would help because with an HDRI, you're getting all the little bits of colors and all the little bits of lighting, and that really helps to make scenes more realistic. I think what you did is you just added like a big area light, and that is okay, but I think using an HDRI would be better. And then you could also use an area light just to light up some things in the scene. And then really, I would just add more stuff. I just don't think there's quite enough stuff. There are a few other things, but mainly just like adding more stuff here. So like maybe adding another plant there, maybe adding another picture, maybe adding some things over here on this desk right here, and then also just maybe adding some more stuff here. You could also add a light, and then also maybe you could add like a light switch, and then also maybe you could add like some electrical plugs right there and there. Just some things that I was thinking of that might help to make it look better. Really, I think that's the main thing, just adding in more stuff, because there isn't very much stuff with how you have it, so really just adding more stuff would really help. There are a few other things. I think maybe making this a darker frame would help, because it is very light and you can see it kind of blends in with the background. So maybe if you made it like a gray frame or a black frame, I think that would help as well. Also, I think this texture is too big, because yeah, these boards just look too big. I would scale them down quite a bit so there's more boards and they're smaller. I also just like drew a rug here if you wanted to maybe add a rug. And then also the lighting is a bit blown out. You can see like there's like a bit of the wall here, and then it's coming over here, and then there's like this, and there's like also a bit of the wall there, but it's really hard to see. It's really quite hard to see. So there are a few things that you could do to fix this. You could change the lighting. I think that would definitely help, because right now it's just so light that you can barely even see the edge of the room right there. What you could also do though is you could just play around with the color correction. So you could go into like the color space where it's like has the Filmic Blender settings in the color management. You could play around with like the gamma and contrast and things. And then also in Blender's compositor, you could add like the RGB curves node and just play around with that. So color correcting it would help. Also just changing the lighting would help, because yeah, I can almost not even see the transition between the wall and the ceiling. Like I can barely see it, but it's really hard to see. So those are the main things. Adding more stuff, maybe using an HDRI to get some more realistic lighting. Also this texture is a little bit too big, and then maybe adding just like a light here in the scene. And the lighting is a bit blown out here, so fixing that would help too. So that's the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending in this artwork. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Caroline Pena. And you said this is your latest piece, which you're the most proud of. And you had to learn how to retopologize and rig the frog for the scene. And you said the rigging might have deformed the frog a little bit. You tried to cover it up by sculpting it. I didn't notice anything. I do think it looks really good. And you said the glowing dots in the scene are supposed to be fireflies. So this is a really cool scene. I really like this. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is really nice. I definitely have some critiques, but this is really nice. I really like how the frog is just like chilling there in the lake, and then it's maybe like the sunset, and the fireflies are very cool. There's also like another frog there. And I really like the foliage and like the grass that you have in there. And I really like the lighting as well. I really like how you have that rim light going along the frog. And you also sent in some other renders here, some like variations of the render. I really like these lily pads here and the little flowers. That's very cool. Here's another one. Here's a close-up one of the frog. I like the texturing. That's really cool. Very nice work. So let's go over how I would critique this. So the first thing that I would do is I would add the glare node in Blender's compositor, because that way it's going to take these really bright areas and it's going to add kind of like a glow effect around it. And then also if the firefly material is bright enough, then it should also make that glowing as well, and I think that would help. I might also add a little bit more fireflies because I do think they're very cool. You might want to go ahead and model some basic fireflies, just some little simple models, but you could also just go with the dots. That is pretty cool having some little glowing dots. I would probably add a few more and kind of put them around, but yeah, adding the glare node would really help because it would just add this little glare around these bright areas. And then the next thing that I would do is I would add a vignette, again in Blender's Compositor. So if you don't know how to add a vignette, I have a tutorial on how to add a vignette in Blender's Compositor. I'll leave the link in the video description. But basically what a vignette does is it just adds a little bit of a darkness, kind of a blurred darkness around the edges, and it kind of centers your eyes into the center of the scene. So in Krita, I just kind of went along here and kind of drew in like a basic vignette. It doesn't look very good, but if you used Blender's Compositor to do it, it would look better. And then also I would add more ripples in the water because the water is very, very smooth. It is like a little bit lumpy here, but it is very, very smooth. So what I would do is I would just go into the materials and use a noise texture and use that as the bump, and then just make it pretty subtle, but just adding more ripples there with something like a noise texture, I think that would really help. Just adds more detail and makes it look more like water. And then also I did notice that the lily pads look like they are hovering a bit. Like right here, it looks like it's almost fully floating. And then there's also a lot of space here. You can see like the reflection. So it does look like it's floating quite a bit. So I would move them down into the water. And then I would also duplicate all the grass and foliage and I would put that into the back here, because especially like right over here on this render, you can see that it just kind of looks like the world ends right there. So adding in like some grass and stuff, and also maybe even making the water longer out so it's farther back would help. And then yeah, just adding more foliage along there so you can't really see where it ends. And then I do really like the flowers that you added, but in this main shot here you can't really see them. You can kind of barely see that one, but like right over here there's these cool flowers here. I really like that. I really like the modeling and the texturing and everything, but I would really like to see it in this scene. So maybe if you wanted to like duplicate them, move them around the scene so that you can see a few of them, that would be really great. And then it seems like something might be wrong with the materials on the lily pads. You can especially see it like right over here. I don't know if you need to maybe shade that object smooth, or maybe there might be a problem with the normal map. I'm not quite sure, but you can see there's like those little lines right there. So if you want to go ahead and fix that, that would be great. My guesses are that it might be a problem with the normal map, or it might be that like the object needs to be shaded smooth. And then the last thing that I would do is I would add a depth of field. So if you click on the camera and then go into the camera settings, then you can turn on the depth of field, and then you can choose to focus on like the main frog object. And then that way the stuff in the background will be just a little bit blurry, and then also the stuff in the front will also be slightly more blurry. And then also to make it feel like you're kind of really down in there in like the pond, what you could do is add more grass. So like duplicate this grass and put it really, really close up to the camera. But then because you have the depth of field, it would kind of blur it. So you just see like some little blurred lines for the grass, but it would kind of make it look like you're more down in there in the pond. So those are the things that I would do to improve this. But this is a really cool scene. I really do like this. I really like how there's like a frog just like chilling there on a lily pad, maybe in the evening. It is really nice. I really like this. So that's the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Deformed Cube. So you said this is a glimpse of an animation short movie that I'm working on. And you said the nurse model was from Mixamo, and then you said everything else you made from scratch. You thought maybe you should darken the environment a bit more. And you said the robot seems to be blending in with the room. Yeah, those are some good points. I do feel like maybe the robot is blending in with the room a little bit. So maybe if you want to change the materials, that would help. Also changing the lighting would help. So putting like a rim light on the character, on the robot here, putting like a rim light so that there's just like a little bit of light here behind the character, a rim light. I think that would really help just to pop out the character from the background. And then also what you could do is you could add a depth of field so that the background is just slightly more blurred and then the robot is slightly more in focus. Those things I think would really help. And you did say that this is a short movie that you're working on. So if you ever finish that short movie that you're working on, you could definitely let me know about it. Send me a link to it. I'd love to check it out. So this is really cool. I do really like it. This robot model is super cool. You have like these spikes here and you have like these big arms, and the face is really cool. And I do like the environment. It does look pretty cool as well. And this character here is great. Like working on a computer. And I do like the things that you pointed out. You were talking about maybe the character blending in with the background. Yeah, so like adding a rim light, adding a depth of field, maybe changing the colors of the background or putting something in the background to kind of make it pop out would definitely help. But other than those few things, the main thing that I think would improve this is the composition. So you did say that it was like an animation, so maybe the composition is good because this is like an animation, so maybe the camera's moving or something, or maybe have a story or something going on. I don't quite know, but looking at this as just a final image, I think the composition could definitely be improved. So what I would do is I would do something like this. So I just kind of like just sketched out a little thing. The drawing is terrible, but hopefully you can get an idea for what I'm thinking. So I was thinking this character right here could maybe be sitting more on the side, and then they could be looking at the monitors like right here, and then the robot character could be more in the center and also looking into the scene. Because right here you have the robot looking away, and then you also have the person looking away, and you don't really want to do that. You want to kind of have the characters generally looking more in the scene, but right now you have the robots pointed this way, the characters pointed this way. So if you have the person kind of looking this way at the monitors, I think that would help. I would also maybe just like make the character sitting down. You could leave it standing up though if you wanted, but I would probably add like a circular platform with like maybe some stairs and have that kind of coming up, and then I would add a depth of field and put the focus on the robots, so that maybe the nurse character and stuff and like the computers, that's just slightly blurred, and then the robot is in full focus. And then the circular platform would kind of draw your eyes to it, and this would be in like pretty much the center of the scene, but a little bit to the side. And then if you want to, you could add like something else in the background to maybe separate it, and then also adding like a rim light would help as well. But I think just doing something a little bit more like this would help, because I do think that the robot is the main thing you want people to look at. So a way to help that be more clear is to have the robot kind of up higher, a little bit more in the scene, kind of pointed towards the scene, and then maybe have them on some sort of platform higher up than the person. I think that would really help to draw your eyes more to this character. So that's the main thing, just improving the composition, but this is really cool. So thank you for sending in this artwork, and if you ever finish that animation, you can definitely leave me a link. I'd love to see it. So that's the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next one is an animation, and this comes from Digital Slacker. And you sent an Eevee version of this and also a Cycles one. And you did two different versions of this animation, one in Cycles and one in Eevee. And you did say that you liked the Eevee render a little bit more. So let me just check out the Cycles one. Yeah, so here is the Cycles one. Okay, and then let's check out the Eevee one. Here's the Eevee one. Yeah, I do think I like the Eevee one a little bit better. And you said it didn't really have the stop motion feel that you were going for. You're definitely doing a time lapse here, so I don't know why you're going for a stop motion feel if you want to go for a time lapse. And you thought the mushroom could use a subtle texture. Yeah, I definitely think it could, because like the mushroom here, it does just look like one color, so adding like a texture here and also a texture on the top, I think that would really help. And you said that you used an image from pngimg.com for the butterfly, and then you also used Blender Kit and then the sapling tree gen. So I went online and I looked at videos of mushrooms growing, and I think that the grass is too fast. Like the grass definitely grows too fast. Grass doesn't grow that fast in just one day as far as I know. I did do a little bit of research online, and yeah, I don't think grass grows that fast in just one day. So I really like how the grass is kind of like moving, and I especially like the lighting and how the trees kind of moves a little bit. I think that's really cool. And I also like how like there's a butterfly coming in that adds more interest to it. And mushrooms do grow pretty fast. I don't know if mushrooms grow this fast in one day, but mushrooms do grow pretty fast. But the grass definitely doesn't grow that fast. So I would say just make it so it doesn't move up quite as much. I do like it that the grass kind of moves back and forth a lot because there's like a wind going by. So I do like that. But yeah, the grass is just growing too fast. And then also the butterfly, you can see it comes right about there, and then it stays there for only like a split second. But it looks like this is a time lapse of a whole day, because you can see it kind of gets dark and then it gets light again. But for that butterfly to sit there being perfectly still like that, it would probably be sitting there for like hours, because this is probably a whole like 1 day time lapse. So that butterfly just being there for a few seconds would probably be there for like an hour or a few hours. That's just something to think about. I do like the butterfly being in it, but I don't know if that's very realistic for it to sit there for that long. And then as you mentioned, I think adding in a texture would be really good. So just maybe like doing some texture painting or doing like a procedural material and putting it on the mushroom room, I think that would help as well. And then to make Eevee look even more realistic, what you could do is you could press Shift A, and then you can go down to that light probe, and then what you can do is you can add the irradiance volume. And then over there on the settings on the side, what you can do is you can click on the indirect lighting in the Eevee render engine once you've added that irradiance volume, and then what you can do is you can bake the indirect lighting. And so that's going to bake the lighting and make it look more realistic, and that would, just make everything more realistic. And then one thing you could also do to make the lighting look a bit more realistic is, if you wanted to have this like one entire day, is you could have the morning light be a bit more yellow, and so you could actually add like a sunlight and then like animate the color value. So in the morning, you could have it a little bit more of like a yellowish color, and then kind of during the day, it could be a little bit more of a bluish color, or maybe just like a less yellow color, and then in the evening, it could be a little bit more of an orange or yellowy color, and that would help to make it look more like a sunrise and a sunset. Because right here, if you go to the starting, let me just pause this. You can see that's like very white light. And that just doesn't really look very realistic to me. Natural lighting is usually kind of yellowish or kind of bluish. So if you want to make it look more yellowish or bluish, I'd probably go with more of like a yellow color. I think that would help. But this is a really challenging thing to do, so you did a really great job on this, and especially the animation is really quite good. So that's the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Factory. So this is a very cool scene. I really like this. I really like the colors that you chose, kind of like the blue, and then there's like this yellow here for the light, and then just kind of like a pinkish purplish light kind of in the middle. And I really like how you have the sky right here. It kind of looks like maybe it's an evening and the sun is just kind of going down in the city, and you can just kind of see some of the pink clouds there. And I really like the modeling that you did, really cool. Coffee shop, that is very cool. And then you have like this road here, and I really like these shadows here and like the silhouette right here with these steps. That looks really cool as well. So this is a very cool artwork, and thank you for sending this in. I definitely have some critiques though, so let's go over that. So one thing that I noticed is that it looks like the O's look a bit 3D. So the other words for the coffee shop, they look flat, but then these O's look kind of 3D. I don't know if you did that specifically, but they kind of stand out and they're separate from like the other letters. So what I would do is I would make the O's look more similar, so I would kind of make them look flat and then kind of like bold like that. Unless you did that on purpose, maybe you wanted the O's to look a little bit different. In that case, you can just leave that how it is. And then also this scene is a little bit dark. Now I know it's supposed to look dark, and also there is this cool light here which kind of draws your eyes to the coffee shop, but I think maybe just adding one more light would be helpful. So if you want to like duplicate this light and kind of move it over, maybe somewhere along here, and you could just try putting it around and see how it looks. Of course, that may not look good. You could definitely try it. I don't have the 3D scene, so I'm not sure, but you could try it and just see what it looks like. But I do really like this silhouette right here, so if it's kind of taking away from the silhouette, then you may not want to do it. Really, that's just something that I would try out. And then it looks like there also is a shading issue on these benches, so it looks like maybe you just shaded the object smooth, but maybe the objects didn't have quite enough geometry, like maybe they need like a little bit of a bevel or something. I'm not quite sure what happened here, but on these benches the shading looks a little bit weird. So if you want to look into that and see what's going on, I think maybe these objects were just shaded smooth, but they didn't have enough geometry, so maybe just adding a bevel to the edges would help. And then also adding more samples would really help. I do say this in a lot of my critiques, but I think people just don't quite use enough sampling a lot of the time, because especially like right over here in these darker places and kind of where these textures are, it does look kind of smudgy. So adding more samples I think would really help. And then the last thing is to be more consistent with your textures, because a lot of this stuff is textured, like this here has a texture, and like this over here, the sidewalk has a texture, and the coffee shop has a texture as well. But then right here, like this wooden stuff, it doesn't have a texture. So I think being more consistent with that would really help, because a lot of this stuff has a texture, but then these wood things here and like this stuff here, the wooden frames around the windows don't have any textures, so adding textures to that would help. And then also just one other little thing, adding bevels to everything would help as well to make it look more realistic, because some of these things look really sharp. So just adding like the bevel modifier onto a bunch of these like cube objects, that would help as well to make it more realistic. But this is a really cool artwork, and I especially like the lighting and the composition. Really nice work, so thank you for sending in this artwork, and I hope the critiques were helpful. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Veal. So they sent in this very cool artwork here, like there's some rocks and stuff, and it looks like maybe you added a procedural texture, which is very cool, and then you have this very cool sword here with a bright light. And specifically, you said that you wanted critiques on the lighting and composition. As far as the lighting and composition goes, I really think this is quite good. The sword is in the rule of thirds, which is really good, and the lighting is pretty good as well. I do really like this bright light right here, which is kind of shining up. So the first thing that I would do is I would add a rim light to make it kind of stand out from the background. Just a simple rim light on the sword. I think that would help. So just take a bright light and put it in the background, and then just kind of play around with where it is to make just a little rim light on the side of the sword. And then I would also use a different metal material, because this metal material, it looks very rough and it has like these little white patches. So I would probably make it a very smooth, shiny metal. So you could try that. Something a little bit more like this handle, but kind of a gray color. I just don't really like this metal material. And then overall, it is pretty good, but I just feel like the scene is a little bit boring. It's not that interesting to look at. So if you wanted to add maybe some other stuff in the scene, maybe add a character, maybe add like a mountain in the background, maybe add some lava coming down or something else, maybe like a cliff or maybe a battle going on here, just something in the background or just something to make it more interesting, because it is really quite good. I do like it, but it's just a bit boring. It's not that interesting to look at. But this is really cool, so I hope the critiques were helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Kiko Does CG. So you said that this is fan art from the game Half-Life. So I looked it up, and I found this part in the game. And you said you mainly wanted critique on the lighting and materials. So this is very cool. I did look up the game. I found this part in the game. I do have a few critiques, but I do think this is quite good. So the first thing that I would do is I'd make these characters or these creatures a little bit lighter. When I looked at some videos from the game, it seemed like these creatures were a little bit lighter colored, but they're very, very dark. They look like fully black. So I'd probably make it a bit lighter and then add some sort of texture. I think that would help. And then really, I don't have much critiques other than just changing the composition. Really, I do think the modeling and the lighting and texturing and everything is really quite good. I just think changing the composition would really help. So what I did is I just kind of sketched out a thing right here. This isn't very good. This is a pretty rough sketch, but just to kind of get an idea, I think it would be better if you show more of the world. And I remember in the video that I watched, there were some floating platforms that would kind of move around. So maybe adding those in, maybe adding in some more platforms and kind of making them farther away. Also, these two characters, they're almost in the same exact position, kind of looking down. So maybe if you'd want to have one of the characters kind of up here looking over, I'm just kind of changing it up a little bit. And also maybe having the camera a little bit higher up and kind of looking down and seeing some other things farther away, just so that you can see more of the world and get a better idea of what the world is kind of created out of. But I do really like these pieces of rocks here, these floating platform things, and I do really like these white dots that you added, and these crystal things are really cool. And overall the modeling is really good, and I also really like this material here. I really like that material, that rock material that you added. I think just changing the composition a bit would help. So that's the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Lars Luther, and you said you named this artwork Almoussol, and you said in Filipino it's the word for breakfast. And you said for context, the artwork features the Philippines' iconic breakfast meal. And I do apologize if I pronounce any of this stuff wrong, but you said the breakfast is pandesal, which is known as salt bread, along with some fillings and some common utensils and objects that are found in Filipino houses. So that is very cool that you created this scene around the iconic breakfast meal from the Philippines. Very nice. And it is a pretty realistic render too, so that is really great. I do really like the lighting. I like how the lighting is coming in here. And there's just maybe a tiny little bit of dust in the air or something, and you can kind of see those light rays coming in. So this is very cool. And also the modeling is really quite good. So something that I noticed here, I think this is a broom. The handle seems quite short. Now this may be because the brooms that they use in the Philippines might just be created a bit different. Maybe they're a bit shorter. I really don't know. I just thought that maybe the handle should be longer, but I really don't know everything about about the iconic breakfast meal from the Philippines. So some of this stuff I may just not really know about. So in that case, you might want to ignore some of the critiques that I have. Although I did notice that the texture looks a bit stretched here. So I don't really know quite what's going on, but maybe fixing the UV mapping here. It just looks like super stretched, and it does look really wide. Maybe just making that a little bit less wide. But again, if you were going for something specific, then you can keep that how it is. And then also, if you didn't use the denoise node, then using that would really help. It does look pretty nice. It looks like maybe you did use the denoise node because everything is pretty sharp except for the little bit of dust kind of in the air, or like you can see the sun rays coming through. So that does just look slightly grainy, but maybe you did that on purpose, or maybe you just didn't add the denoise node. So maybe just adding the denoise node in Blender's compositor and just seeing if that looks any better. And then also I noticed that there's just like this metal piece back here behind the table. So again, I don't know if this is something that's common in the houses. Maybe this metal piece here is for something special, but I really don't know. So I would probably get rid of it just because it seems a little bit out of place. But again, you can ignore me if you did that purposefully. And then also, I don't really know why there is like a plastic table. It seems like inside a house it would probably be like a wooden table, so I would probably change it out for a wooden table. But again, you probably know what you were going for, so if you were specifically trying to make a plastic table, it does look kind of like a plasticky material, then you could keep that. And then the last thing that I would do is I would change the scale of the texture, because right here it almost looks like I can see the pixels of the texture. The texture just looks too big, so I would probably scale it down so that you can see more of it, just because it seems a little bit low quality, especially like right over here. It just seems a little bit low quality. So that's what I would do to improve this, but this is very cool. It's really cool that you created that specific iconic breakfast in the Philippines. That's very cool. And everything is quite realistic, so really great job on this. I hope the critiques were helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Meat. So Meat sent in this very cool artwork here, very cool character, and there's a nice car here, and I really like the grass that you added. That's really good. And the background here, this is really cool. I'm not quite sure if this was just like an image texture or if you created all of this, but it does look really good. So the first thing that I noticed is that there is this like red smoke, and smoke just really isn't red. Smoke is usually just kind of like a gray color or a black color. So I would probably change the smoke color to just like a gray color. And then also over here on the grass, I think the grass is a little bit too big. It just seems too big, so I would scale it down quite a bit, and then you could also add some more grass, and then maybe even change the rotation a little bit if you can to make it look a little bit different, because some of this grass looks pretty similar, especially like right there. You can see a lot of those pieces of grass look like they're going at the same angle, and that's not super realistic. So making the grass smaller, kind of rotating it, maybe even giving it some random scale, I think that would really help. And then also underneath the grass, you can see that there is like this dirt texture here, and that dirt texture looks way too big. I can see like these little like chunky pieces of dirt in little colors. So I would say scale that way down so that there's a lot more detail, so you can see a lot more of the dirt, because it just looks way too big. And then also, I really have no idea what this is. It looks kind of like a table, and then it looks like it maybe has like a cloth over it, but then there's like these little things here, like these things wrapping around it. Maybe there's some straps or something. I really don't know what this is, so just being more clear about what this is, that would really help. But then the main critique that I have with this is that the hill looks like it's tilting over too much. So if you look at the background and then you compare that to the characters, and especially this car here, it looks like the car would just fall off the edge because it's kind of tilting over. And also the character doesn't look like he's standing up straight compared to the background. So you can see like where the background is. If I just kind of like draw this, if there were like a big plane here on the background, you can see the background kind of comes out there. So the character probably would need to come back a little bit more towards you, because yeah, everything just looks like it's tilting over a bit. This looks like it would just like fall over. The car looks like it would probably just roll down the hill. So what I would do is I would select the character and select like the grass and the ground, and then also like select the two things on the side, and then just kind of rotate it up a bit more so that the character is a bit more straight up and the car is a little bit more like, instead of the car going down like this, the car should probably be a little bit more like that. So it's going a little bit more straight. That was a really big thing that I noticed that looked a bit off. I think everything is just rotated like down and over a bit too much. So bumping that up, rotating it up a bit, I think would really help. So that's the critique, but this is really cool. The character is really cool. He's got some very cool gear here, and this is a very nice car, and it's a very interesting scene. And overall, I do think the composition is pretty good. There's like the character, and he's like the main focus, and he's just kind of in the very center of the scene. I think that looks pretty good. He's kind of like looking down over, maybe like there was a battle here. It looks like there's some like damaged houses and things. So that is it. I hope the critiques were helpful, and thank you for sending this in. And this next artwork comes from Mr. Lee. So you said this is your latest work, and you said it's an Apache helicopter model, and then there's the garage. And the entire scene was modeled and rendered with Blender, and you textured it in Substance Painter. And you said that the flag on the wall looks pretty bad. Yeah, I do agree. It doesn't look that good. And then you uploaded 2 renders. One of them was a little bit more bright and a little bit more contrasty, and so you sent in both of them. I am using the more bright one and more contrasty one because, yeah, I do think that looks quite a lot better just because it's brighter and you're able to see more of the details in the scene. So this is a very, very cool scene. The modeling is really good. I really like the texturing, and there's all these like cool little metal cans here. That's really cool, and I like the little cones here. And yeah, the helicopter is really quite good. Really like it, and the materials and textures are really quite good. It's a very cool scene to look at, so great work on this. So as you mentioned, the flag here, the United States flag, it looks quite bad. It looks really like warped here and kind of saggy, like maybe it's wet, but the texture's kind of stretched here. It doesn't really feel like a cloth material. It just doesn't really feel like that. It almost feels like it's made out of some like rubbery or stretchy material. And then also, I think it definitely needs to be longer because it's a bit too short, but yeah, I definitely think it should be longer. And then I don't know why there's all these little dots here. Maybe it was supposed to look like dirt, but I probably would get rid of that. Maybe I would just add like a subtle, very subtle dirt texture, but that is like super, super dark. And then making it look more like a cloth material would really help as well. So something you could try turning on is the sheen. So if you turn on the sheen, that can make it look more like cloth. And then also what you could do is maybe download like a cloth texture and then take the normal map from the cloth texture and put it on as the normal, and that'll just give it more of a cloth look. So you could go onto a website like Ambient CG and then look for a cloth or a fabric texture. Just download one of the textures and then just take the normal map and put that through the bump and put that into the normal of the principal shader, and that should make it look more like cloth. Now over here on the helicopter, you can't really see through the windows, so that's not really realistic. You need to see out the window. The pilot would need to see out the window, but it almost looks like there's just like a bunch of ice on top of it or something, or it's really, really dirty. So I'd probably make the windows much more transparent so you can see through them, because you just can't see through them at all. And then right down over here, this texture looks very, very bumpy. It looks like you took the bump on the normal map or the strength of the normal and just turned it way up, but it looks like it's kind of breaking the texture. It's just like really, really bumpy. Looks kind of unrealistically bumpy. Doesn't look very good, so I would probably turn that down a bit. It should be bumpy. It definitely should be bumpy because it's like a concrete material, but this is way too bumpy. It looks very sharp and jagged, so I would turn that down a bit. And then something you could try to make the composition a bit better is you could try putting the helicopter a little bit more in the center and maybe pointed towards the center more. So if you wanted to like rotate the helicopter over and kind of put it a little bit more in the center, so like the center of the helicopter is maybe more right here, because right now the front of the helicopter is just kind of coming off over here. So maybe just rotating it, putting it over here, maybe also taking this like lamp and kind of putting it a little bit more over here so there's a little bit more room. You could try that. I don't know how that would look, but maybe rotating it and putting kind of more of the center of the helicopter in the center of the scene, I think that might help. I do think the composition is pretty good though, how it is. So you have the main helicopter here on kind of one of the rule of thirds, and then on the other rule of thirds you have this lantern right here. And also something that I just noticed is that there's like this little metal piece coming down, and it almost just kind of helps you to point your attention to the lantern right here. I just noticed that, but that's pretty cool. And then the last thing that I would do is I would add bevels to some of these objects. So especially like right up here, some of these things look really sharp, like that looks very sharp and that's very sharp. This looks a bit sharp as well. So just like selecting that object and maybe adding the bevel modifier, and it doesn't have to be very big. It should just be very, very small, but it does really help to make it look more realistic, especially like right here. You can see that is very sharp. So just adding a very subtle bevel along there would really help. So that's the critique, but this is very, very cool. I really like the helicopter model. It's really good. The lighting is quite good as well, and I really like the texturing. I hope the critiques were helpful, and thank you for sending this in. All right, and this next artwork comes from Mordaza. So they sent in this very cool abstract scene right here. There's like this big glowing thing here, and then there's some people here. I definitely have some critiques, but this is very cool. So the biggest problem I have with this is that I just feel like it's a little bit too abstract. Now I have seen these kind of like 3D abstract renders, and there are definitely artists who can do a really good job with these abstract renders, but I feel like this is just a little bit too abstract. Of course, that's just my personal opinion. You can totally feel free to disagree, but for instance, like this here, I really don't know what this is. Maybe it's like a sun, but it's just like perfectly white. And then also there just are like some weird random like glowing discs and things. Some of them are on the ground, and then some of them are just like sitting up here. So I just don't really get why they're sitting up here, like why there's just some random discs kind of around. They're kind of like glowing and transparent. And then also I think it is a really good idea that you added people. That's very cool, and the people are like looking up here at this glowing thing. But both of these people look exactly the same, and also they're perfectly white. So I would probably texture them and then also maybe change them so that they look a little bit different, because right now they look exactly the same. They're even in like the exact same pose. So changing the pose as well would help. And then also using the denoise node in Blender's compositor. So after you render this out, you can go in the compositing tab and add the denoise node. And that way, like this little bit of grain and stuff will be smoothed out. And then also right up here, I think adding a subdivision surface to this round object would help, because you can see that it looks kind of sharp right here. You can see there's like a sharpness like right there to there and there to there. So adding a subdivision surface would just smooth that out. And then when I was looking online at these abstract renders, something that I noticed is that the materials are always very interesting. And I feel like these materials are actually kind of boring. So if you tried to make the materials more detailed and interesting, I think that would really help. This is a cool material, but it is just kind of like white and pink, and it is kind of low quality as well. And then these, they look like they just have maybe like a bluish or purplish color. Not a very interesting material here on the rock. So maybe if you wanted to like make a rock shader or something like that, that would really help. And like over here on these planets, you can see that the planets are also pretty low quality. It almost looks like I can see the pixels on the texture. And then also I would change the background, because this background right here doesn't look very good. At least I really don't like it. I don't like how there's like these random little swiggly bits. It looks like maybe just like a noise texture or something like that. Now, because this is kind of looking like a sci-fi render, and there's also like these planets here, I would probably add like stars in the background. So if you wanted to like just model some stars, put them around, and then just have like a black background, that would help. You could also go onto some like free stock image site like Pixabay or something, and you could search up like space background and then find like a space image background and just put that in the background. Or maybe you could make some sort of like planet or nebula, or maybe even you could like make a galaxy and put that in the background. I think just having space would be a lot better, and I just don't really like that blobby look in the background. So adding like black and then adding like some stars for space, I think that would help. Also in Blender's compositor, you could add the glare node, and that way these bright areas are going to be glowing a little bit. So there's just going to be just a little bit of glare, just kind of like a purplish whitish glowing there on the pink material, and that would just make it a bit nicer. So that's it. Those are the critiques, and I think if you improve those things, then this would look really cool. So I hope the critiques were helpful, and thank you for sending in this artwork. Alright, and this next artwork comes from Nudjabees. I hope I pronounced that right. And you said that it's supposed to be a hotel for factory workers. So I like a lot of things about this scene. I really like the grass that you added. That's really cool. And the textures are really quite good. And I really like this pool here and like the chairs and this texture that you added in. That's quite good. And the water looks very realistic as well. All right. So the first thing that I noticed is that this tree actually looks way too big, especially if you zoom right in here and look at like the nettles from the tree. It is kind of pixelated, but this house is really quite big. It's like 2 or 3 stories. And if you look and see how big the trunk is, that's really quite big. And there are types of trees which are this big, obviously. But if you like look at the needles of the tree, you can see that this tree is actually supposed to be quite a bit smaller. So I think this tree is actually scaled up maybe like 3 times too big. So if you have the tree maybe only like this big, I think that would be a lot better, just because it looks like a smaller tree, especially because you can see the needles from the tree. So I think think maybe making it only like this big would make it more realistic. And then I think this tree right over here has the same problem, because you can see how big those leaves are. If you were to think about how big a person is compared to this door, if they were to walk over here, those leaves would be pretty big, and this looks like a tree that would be quite a bit smaller. So I would probably make this tree only like half its size or something like that, because yeah, just compare this to like how big the door is, so how high a person would be. If they walked over here, you know, those leaves would be really quite big. This tree right over here I think is the correct size. I think that does look pretty good, but this tree and this tree I think should be smaller. Now also adding a bevel would really help to make it look more realistic, because if you zoom in here, this is really quite sharp. I don't think you added a bevel, so adding just a small bevel, it doesn't have to be very much, but just adding in a subtle bevel using the bevel modifier, adding it to all these sharp objects would really help, and especially right up here, this is also looking really sharp. So just add a bevel modifier to those objects. And then I do think the brick textures are a bit too small, especially if you compare it like down here to these other brick textures. It just seems way too small. The bricks seem very small, so I think making the bricks a bit bigger would help. And if these brick textures came with a displacement, you might want to use that and actually displace it a little bit, because bricks do pop out. And this actually looks pretty flat here. I don't even know if you used a normal map. Maybe you did use a normal map, but it looks pretty flat. So maybe using the displacement, that would kind of make the geometry actually bump out a bit. So if you've never used displacement textures before, then it would probably be good just to watch like a beginner tutorial on how to use displacement textures. I don't have a video about that on my channel, but you could just look that up on YouTube, and I'm sure there's a lot of tutorials. And then just like many of my critiques, I do think that adding more samples would really help, because right in here, especially where it's kind of darker in the shadow, it just looks a bit smudgy, and the texture doesn't look quite that good. So just adding a little bit more samples would really help. And then I think this texture is also scaled up a little bit too much. So if you scale it down so it has more detail, so you can see more of the texture, I think that would help, because it just looks a little bit too big. You can see kind of like those pieces there, I think just look a little bit too big. So scaling that down so that it has more detail would help. So those are the critiques. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and this next render comes from Traitler Hacked GHT. And you said that mainly you wanted to improve realism and composition. So this is a very cool scene. I really like it. The grass in nature looks really quite good. I actually do really like the composition. It's really good. I like how this is kind of the main thing that you look at. And then I like how there's sort of like an evening. Maybe there's a sunset or a sunrise. So you can see that light coming through there. And then there also is just a little bit of sunbeams kind of coming over there. That's really quite good. So the first thing that I would do is I would add a bevel, because right in here, this looks pretty sharp. Now it doesn't have to be a very big bevel, just a little small bevel, but if you added the bevel modifier and just made it really small, I think that would help to make it look more realistic. And then also something looks kind of off with these vines. At least I think that they're vines, and I think what's wrong with them is they're all kind of the same. So like the leaves on the vine kind of all look the same. You can see they're all like coming down like this. These look pretty good kind of coming over here, but then this looks pretty similar. So I would say maybe changing that up a bit, kind of making the leaves pointed in different directions would help. Now you are wondering how to improve the realism and composition, and I do think the realism is quite good. I don't know how you could make it too much more realistic, and the composition I think is really good. I do think the lighting could be improved just a little bit, so I think maybe just adding a little bit of a rim light and also pointing the light at the main subject, because there is kind of some light coming like right over here, and there also is some light coming back here. So I think what you could do is just add like a tiny little bit of a rim light, just kind of like a golden or yellow colored rim light kind of right here where that light is, and then maybe if it looks good, just adding like a light over here and having it kind of shining over here. It would be subtle, but just lighting up this right here, I think that would help. And then you'd have to play around with this because the main light source is kind of behind it, but you could try adding a subtle kind of yellowish light right over here and have it kind of shining over here, just so that this kind of side of it is lit up just a little bit more. But really, I think the realism and composition is quite good. I really do like the composition. There's just that main pillar right there, and it's just kind of right in the middle of the scene, kind of on the side, which is really good. It's the perfect place for it. And looking at the grass and the nature and the trees and everything, I really think it looks quite good. I really like also how there's like these little white things here. It almost looks like it just rained recently, and there's just a little bit of water on the leaves there. So really nice work, and I also really like the lighting here coming from behind. So that's it for the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending this in. Alright, and then we have 3 artworks left, and these all come from Ultranova33. So it looks like you did Blender Guru's donut tutorial, and that is very cool. There definitely are a lot of things that I would do to improve this though. So it looks like there's some kind of issue with the textures here. It looks like there isn't a color map. There just doesn't seem to be much color. And then also it seems like there's an issue with the normal map. So maybe just checking over that and making sure you set everything up properly. I do have a beginner tutorial on how to properly set up texture maps. So I'll leave a link in the description if you'd like to watch that. And also I did just notice that there does seem to be like a little seam right here. So maybe just like moving this over or changing the UV map so that there's no seam there in the texture. And then also adding the denoise node in Blender's compositor would really help. It doesn't really speed up the render times by that much, maybe only a second or two, but it would get rid of all this noise right here. And then right over here on the icing on the donuts, it looks very sharp. You can see there's like some really sharp places right here, and also it looks like the same right here. It's very sharp. I don't think it would ever be that sharp. Usually it's a bit more smooth and lumpy, so fixing that would be really good. And also these look pretty the same, like that sharp part looks the same as this. So this donut, you could probably rotate it around so that it has like a random rotation, and then it will look a little bit different, because you can see like these 2 dots are the same as these 2 dots, so it just looks the same. So just rotating that around so you see it from the other side would make it look different. And then also right in here you can see that it kind of looks like it's floating a little bit. So if you kind of thickened it up so that it's kind of thicker and going into the donut, that would help as well, because it looks like it's floating just a little bit. And then I think the plate is a bit too thick as well. I think that plate should probably only be like half the thickness. Now this texture down here is scaled up a bit too much. If I zoom in here, I almost can see the pixels. I think I can actually see the pixels in the texture. So scaling that down so that there's more detail and you can see more of that marble would help as well. And then these sprinkles are really quite big, and they're kind of going through each other. You can see a lot of them are overlapping. So if you go to the particle system settings and scale that down quite a bit, I think that would help, because there's just so many of them. Turning down a number would help, but then also just really making them smaller would really help, because a lot of them are just going through each other, and that doesn't look very realistic. And then also sprinkles usually are kind of shiny and reflective. So if you go into the material for the sprinkles, you can turn down the roughness, and that'll make them more shiny. And then the last thing is that this texture right here looks pretty low quality, so I don't quite know what happened. Maybe when you were texture painting this, if you did texture paint it, maybe you used too small of an image, maybe just like a 1K image, so maybe making like a 4K image or something a little bit higher quality, or maybe just re-texture painting that, or if you use some sort of bread texture, maybe just scaling it up a little bit or scaling it down so you have more detail, because it just looks a bit low quality at this point. It just doesn't look very good. You can see there's just like little bits of color right there, and it looks like it's just scaled way up. So those are the critiques for this one. Now let's jump over to the second artwork. And the second artwork that you sent in here is this really cool low poly house. I really like this one. I really like the low poly trees, and especially the house is really quite good. I like how you use those little kind of bricks or things right here, but you didn't put them all over the place. You just put them in here and there. I think that looks really good. And I kind of like how it's a little bit wobbly. It's not quite the same on each side. It just looks a little bit different and a little bit funky sort of. I like how that looks. Let's go over how I would improve this render. So I don't really know what these are. Maybe they're rocks. I just really don't know. And also compared to the other stuff, they are kind of high detail. So probably I would make them lower detail. And then if they're rocks, I would probably give them a little bit more random shape, because they're very smooth and rotated. And I don't know why they look kind of like they're cut open and then kind of squished together. They look like they kind of got squished down. So I really just don't know what they are. And then I don't know why there's just some cubes just kind of stuck into the ground. Maybe these are supposed to look like bricks that you walk on. So if they are supposed to be bricks that you're walking on, setting them up more like this would help. So I just kind of drew out how I would set them up. So kind of putting them together more and rotating them so they're sideways, and then just kind of stacking them around so that they're a little bit offset. Right now they're just kind of slanted and they're kind of coming way up in the ground. And then I see here that you added a bevel to these, and I think that looks really good. So also adding a bevel to those bricks would help to keep it more consistent. And then again, talking about consistency, you can see that right up here on the chimney, that's kind of high topology, but you can see the rest of this stuff is pretty low topology and kind of, that low poly feel, very little detail. But you can see there's like lots of planes in here. So I'd probably delete that and then add a new cone and then just make the vertice count way down so there aren't all these little lines here, because it just looks like too high poly. And then there is a lot of extra space over here and here, so I'd probably move the camera in and then also make it a square camera just so that you can kind of see like this, pretty much like that. That's probably the only stuff that I would show because there is just like a lot of extra stuff here, and I just don't really think you need it. So just kind of zooming in, kind of cropping that down, or just like changing the size of the camera and zooming that in would be great. All right, so that is the second artwork. Now let's jump over to the last artwork. Alright, and the last artwork that you sent in is the robot tutorial that I have on my YouTube channel. You went and did my robot tutorial, and you did the entire thing, so you even set up the animation. So let's just go ahead and watch this animation. Very cool. I really like the robot model. It looks quite good, and I really like their lighting, and you have that cool like fog stuff going through, so very nice. So there are a few ways that can give the animation more realism. So when the robot moves over, the legs of the robot are going to kind of be trailing behind it. And then as the robot stops, the legs are going to kind of come back and then kind of go back and forth for a little bit as they stop, unless the robot is specifically moving them. But if they're just kind of hanging down here, the robot's going to move. And then when the robot stops, the legs will kind of dangle a little bit. So the legs look pretty stiff right now. So if you want to just make them dangle a little bit more, that would really help. And then something else that would really help is if you gave more character to the robot. So right now the robot just kind of goes over there, then it just kind of goes back. He looks around a little bit, but he doesn't really do much with his hands. He doesn't really look over very much. So you could have him looking around more, maybe like he looks over here, then he looks over here, and really make it very clear with where he's looking instead of just kind of slowly looking. And also moving his legs or arms around more to make it look like he's more alive. So, you know, as he looks over here, maybe his gun would kind of come up a little bit and look over, or maybe his claw would kind of come up and his arms would move around and interact with what he's looking at. And maybe just have his arms doing a little bit more stuff, that would help as well. And then just generally, he does seem pretty stiff. He kind of just moves over here and then just kind of moves back and then moves over. So if you want to have him maybe move over and then kind of stop at one point and then move over to a specific point, just giving the character more intention of where he's actually going, that would really help to just make it more clear and give him more character. Now I know that animation is quite hard. I still am terrible at animation. I really don't have a ton of skill with animation, but really just trying to be more clear about it and giving more intention to the character. Especially right here at the end, you can see he doesn't really move around at all. He just goes from here all the way over, and his head isn't even moving, and his hands and arms aren't really moving. He just kind of goes out to the side. So giving him more character, maybe, you know, he looks where he goes. You know, if somebody's walking around, they're usually going to look where they're going. So maybe having the robot turn, and then maybe his hands move up, and then he goes over, that would really help. So that's the critique. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for sending in your artworks. So with that artwork finished, this is going to wrap it up for the 11th Blender art critique video. Thank you everyone for submitting your artworks, and I hope that the critiques were helpful. And thank you everyone for watching the video. And if you'd like your artwork to be in the next art critique video, then you can submit it through the Google form. The link is in the description. And again, you can submit your artwork anytime you want throughout the month, but the best time to submit your artwork is around the last couple of days of the month, because then at the first of the month, I look through all the submissions and then I create the critique video as soon as I can. So if you submit your artwork at the end of the month, then you won't have to wait as long for the critique video. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.